Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Washington. Now joining us is Ali Hamida. He's a professor and chair of the Department of Political Science at the University of New England in Biddeford, Maine. He specializes in political theory, anti-colonial resistance in modern Libya, and is the author of 2 books on Libya: The Making of Modern Libya, State Formation, Colonization and Resistance, and Forgotten Voices, Power and Agency in Colonial and Post-Colonial Libya. Thanks very much for joining us, Ali.
My pleasure, Paul.
While Gaddafi was integrating Libya into the kind of Western economy, and there was lots of privatization taking place, and he was doing more or less what the IMF wanted, one of the critiques of the rebellion is that they actually don't differ on that you actually may have even more opening up of Libya to Westernization. Is that, who are the people that are driving this?
Paul, there are 2 issues that are important to realize before we could answer this question. First is the Libyan regime, for the last 10 years before the major uprising, have pursued somehow a policy of reform. The most able elements in the regime executed a very efficient, very pragmatic policy that led to reconciling with the Western governments, resolving the Lockerbie disastrous crisis, and also opening a resumption of diplomatic relations with the United States and with the other Western government. That reformist agenda, in the external affairs, it was not reciprocated internally, and it was a cosmetic reform which frustrated many people who were calling for genuine reform in Libya. And when the door was closed, when the reform process was aborted, a lot of people began to say this regime is not reformable. And add to that the most disastrous, bloody repression of the protests in Benghazi and in Baida, many people defected. A lot of the leaders of the council in Benghazi, many of them are the most respected reformist officials in the Gaddafi regime. To answer your question now, who are the people who are leading this uprising? We have 2 groups. The social base, or the mass groups, are youth who are educated under the regime. You're talking about people who have university degrees, unemployed. And Libya, 70% of the Libyan population is under 30 years old. And Libya has one of the highest literacy rates in Africa. So we're talking about an educated, literate, urban population led by a coalition of judges, lawyers, civil rights activists, women activists, academic, journalists, who are leading this group, and also defected military officers and diplomats from the Gaddafi regime.
When you say reform, that could mean different things, because everybody talks about reform, but there's different interests want different kinds of reforms. So there's like one set of reforms has to do with democratization and moving towards a real elections. But there's also what gets called reform is more integration into the Western economy, which some people call neoliberal economics, which includes privatization and more openness to Western capital. Which set of reforms are we talking about here?
Well, I think the majority of the Libyan people they do agree on certain set of goals now. Libya is one of the richest countries in Africa. Libya has only 6.5 million people, but at the same time, in its last 2 decades, corruption has been widespread. Unemployment rate was as high as maybe 25%. Especially among the youth. And most Libyans who work for the government, they get $300, $400 a month. On the top echelon of the elite, you find people who are really making a lot of money. Here's the irony, Paul. The reform that started mainly reforming, having a constitution, Libya doesn't have any constitution, Paul, until now. Having a clear addressing of the falling and of the public institution like education and healthcare. Most Libyans now, they can't get even treatment that really was free and very, very decent up until the last 20 years. And they have to go spend their own money to be treated in Tunisia or in Egypt. There's many, many young people who are unemployed and they can't find jobs. So we're talking about economic and social grievances, a little bit of opening at the beginning of the millennium, but really not in pace with the major alienation and demands of the vast majority of middle and lower class Libyans. And for that reason, what you have is the council is really pushing for many of these demands, especially these demands were pushed by these reformist folks who were working with the Gaddafi regime, including people like the ex-Justice Minister, Judge Mustafa Abdel-Jalil, who is heading the council, or one of the major diplomats for the council, a very, very good friend of mine by the name of Dr. Mahmoud Jibril. These people were trying to push institutionalization, fighting corruption, freeing the press, allowing people to have stable, dependable jobs, educating the elite, the youth.
But what I'm asking something specific, which is some of the people that have left Gaddafi's regime that had very senior positions there and joined the rebellion. One of the critiques of what's been happening the last few years, as you just mentioned, people are now paying for health care where before it was socially provided. That there's been, you know, to whatever kind of social network, social democratic type of reforms Gaddafi brought in, he was undoing as part of this kind of what was called liberalization of the Libyan economy. But if these people have joined the rebellion, are they for more of that kind of liberalization, or are they for
no.
different kind of
I think
economy?
we have to be they were the vast majority of Libyans. Forget about the opposition abroad, which has its own agenda. People inside Libya were they were very patient. They were not poor like the neighboring Tunisian and Egyptians, but they were really frustrated because their sense of we are a smaller country, we should have a stable, dependable government, and our daily lives doesn't have to be deteriorated so much. So they are concrete social and economic demands. And the Gaddafi's regime, that's the irony, educated many of these youth. I mean, Libyan women who are now pilots, judges, writers, ministers, they are having, they are literate and they make 60% of Libyan university student body. These are educated under this regime, but the regime reached a dead end. It really failed to address the uprising in neighboring countries, and the old grievances that have not been addressed were crushed when the regime said, no, the protesters are drug addicts, they are Al-Qaeda brainwashed youth, and they are lunatics, and they are even rats. This is a declaration of war against the very people that you're supposed to address and listen to.
Thanks very much for joining us, Ali.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.